Excellencies, distinguished guests, we will resume now with the second session on geoeconomics. ASEAN-China geoeconomics, I mean, what we're seeing in the world is a lot of conflict, tensions, and now even wars. But a lot of it is contested in the geoeconomic arena, with the rare earths, with the chips, supply chains, global value chains. So let us proceed. Our first speaker is Dr. Lai. Dr. Lai has come from Shenzhen, and she is an expert on global value chains, and you can see her bio. And we're very pleased. Thank you very much for making a trip to come here, Dr. Lai. The floor is yours. Please go ahead. We're looking at maybe 15 minutes, 12 to 15 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. It is my great pleasure to visit Chulalongkorn University. Today, I would like to talk about the competition and complementarity in China-ASEAN high-tech trade, and also is an extension of my previous work. And currently, I'm cooperating with ICE's team in Singapore on how Shenzhen-based high-tech companies reorient their manufacturing bases in Southeast Asia. We mainly focus on the high-tech products. So your comments and critics would be much appreciated because this is an ongoing project. And I would like to start from my research background. So I did my PhD in international relations in New Zealand from 2016 to 2022. So for that thesis, I looked back on the journey of Factory Asia's golden age, mainly targeting from 1995 to 2015, how East Asian evolves on manufacturing industries. So the first stage, which is well known, the Japan late flying geese model. And the second stage is when APEC was created in 1989, and the U.S. China economic coupling start to develop. So we can see from the right image. So before 1990, the main player in these production networks is Japan-centered, and from 1995, the U.S. get involved. So actually, APEC is the institutional facilitator for settling down the real production dynamics. And in 2005, that's like 4 years after China's accession to WTO, and China became the third epicenter of these production networks. So that's back in the 1990s. And this is the comparison map between 1995 and 2015. We can see China is a prominent hub in, this is a manufacturing production networks. So because I do not show the specific sectors, but I also did that part of work. So my conclusion is that China presents a unique case study because it is different with Japan's mode. So because of its economic scale, it has great presence in both low-tech and high-tech sectors. So thus it is a production partner and competitor to developing and advanced nations alike. So this is the starting point. And next, I would like to talk about the theoretical framework. So this based on the so because now today we are talking about geoeconomics. So I will focus on high-tech manufacturing value chains. And firstly, I show the restructuring of tech value chains in general, and then see how ASEAN position themselves in this dynamics. And this is the methodology. So again, it is using TIVA data from 2000 to 2022, and I classify the manufacturing into high-tech manufacturing and middle high-tech. So the high-tech include three sectors. They are pharmaceuticals, the second one is computer electronics, the third one is other transport, mainly for aviation. And the middle high-tech is machinery, chemicals, electrical equipment, and vehicles. So put simply, that is to decompose the trade and to see who contributes the value added. So I categorize to domestic versions and foreign versions. And for the foreign versions, that's foreign dependence. And then I further divide it into China, EU, USA, Japan, because they are the four pillars for tech inputs. And to complement the industry level data, I am doing some case studies. So many on Guangdong ASEAN regional value chains. So ICT manufacturing is one, and the other is home appliance manufacturing. So this is the big structure. So we can see the upper part and the lower part. Upper part is absolute volume of exports, and the lower is value added. So we can see like the left is China. We can see the light blue is explosive growth in electronics. That's very prominent, and that's why I choose ICT manufacturing, and we can see it's not only in absolute volume but also value added. That means by participating production networks, China has gradually grabbed value added from technology and the local supply chain ecosystem development. And this is the revealed comparative advantage based on value added. So we can see U.S. is still relatively good at high tech. The U.S. is green line. So the highest comparative advantage comes from other transport. That's aviation, and then pharma, and then electronics. And the second point is the EU and China have very opposite comparative advantage in high tech, but more similar in mid tech. And the third one is the EU has a comparative disadvantage in the key industries, driving both global and Chinese import growth. That's electronics. I categorize the three high tech together and the four mid tech together to see the structural dynamics here. So the chart on the left depicting the high tech sectors clearly illustrates the emergence of a multipolar system. While the EU, US, Japan maintained significant shares early on, the most striking feature is the dramatic ascent of China's share, marked by red. And the chart on the right shows a similar, perhaps even more pronounced trend in mid-high tech. So this global shift forms the backdrop for our analysis of ASEAN's trade relationships. So here I would like to further focus on ASEAN's tech inputs from the four pillars. The top chart, firstly is pharmaceuticals. Dependence here is relatively low overall. So it's around 2% to 4%. However, we observe a crucial shift. China's input, still red line, shows a sharp acceleration after 2018, climbing towards levels of the US and EU. And then the middle chart is electronics. This is where the shift is the most evident. So in 2000, ASEAN primarily relied on the US and Japan for inputs. But over the next 2 decades, China's reliance share surged from 2 to 14%. This demonstrates a massive substitution effect. And that means China becomes the dominant supplier of intermediate electronics components to ASEAN's assembly hubs. And the bottom chart is the other transport, mainly aviation. So the dependency on the four centers has been quite volatile here. We again see a noticeable upward trajectory for China's share. And for the mid-high tech, that's the lower four charts. So for machinery and electrical equipment, in both these foundational sectors, the pattern is consistent and strong. China's dependency share has risen consistently. And then on chemicals, similar to, China's share has grown to slightly exceed the dependency on the US and Japan. And for the motor vehicles, it comes more later until like the late 2010s. So we can see the Chinese components is surge. In summary, the data overwhelmingly confirms that between 2000 and 2022, ASEAN's high-tech and mid-high-tech manufacturing output has rapidly integrated with China and increasingly dependent on inputs originating from China. And this is more like macro level. Because I come from Shenzhen, so I'm comparing at the provinces or city level which ASEAN member is regarded as the most important trading partner for different local governments. So on the top is Yunnan, Sichuan, Chongqing, Guangxi, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen. And then so for Yunnan, Myanmar is the largest trading partner, and Sichuan is Vietnam. Again, Vietnam for Chongqing, Vietnam for Guangxi, Vietnam for Guangzhou, but for Shenzhen, Malaysia is the biggest trading partner. But from ASEAN's perspective, we can easily see that except Guangxi and Vietnam, Shenzhen actually plays the #1 role for almost all ASEAN members as the biggest trading partner. Here, Shenzhen stands out with its trade relations with Malaysia. I think that's very highly relevant to the electronics industry connections. And and then Vietnam, Guangxi, I think a lot of Guangdong-based home appliance manufacturing companies, they are using Guangxi as a platform to integrate with Vietnam. So in the case studies, I'm going to use ICT manufacturing and home appliances for the pilot studies. But I noticed that Thailand also has a very strong presence in EV sectors. That's something still under consideration, and I would like to cooperate with local scholars as well. So for this ICT sector, so I divide into upstream, midstream, and downstream, and interview Guangdong-based manufacturing companies to see how they relocate their different parts within Guangdong and then in ASEAN. And so the upstream section, so we first look at the upstream section, so which includes R&D and supply of critical components. That's the true value-added drivers. We observe significant concentration in Guangdong. So we can see the data. R&D 69% in Guangdong and 62% parts supply. This is our first key finding. The core technological and strategic functions remain highly centralized in China. The technological leadership is retained. And then on the middle part is midstream section. However, if we look at the final product manufacturing, Guangdong is 82.8%, and in comparison, 58.6% is being channeled into ASEAN. So that means physical manufacturing and assembly are actively relocating to ASEAN bases. And then the last part is lower section. So the data here is over 50% for sales and export and 41% for logistics in Guangdong. Still, Guangdong maintains a higher concentration. So in synthesis, the data confirms the asymmetrical dependence pattern. ASEAN receives the physical assembly, but China retains control over the core technological inputs. And then I would like to do like some comparison with home appliance manufacturing because that's more labor-intensive sector. And so in this sector, still, if we focus on upstream section, Guangdong fully controls the product life cycle and core technology design. But for the midstream, because of the cost of and the scale advantage of China's mega factories in this industry, so still heavily leveraged. Okay, so to wrap up, the home appliance sectors reinforces the core thesis. High-value functions are centralized in China, while production is partially decentralized for market access and cost benefits. So these are the key takeaways and policy implications. The strategic question for ASEAN is how can ASEAN upgrade within China-centered networks while maintaining diversified external linkages. And we have an initiative which is put forward by our dean back in 2022 at Boao Asia Forum on China-ASEAN Common Market. So this is a non-exclusive ASEAN-centered initiative which facilitates 5 key elements, which include the traditional goods, services, capital, but also add technology and knowledge. And we notice this is the technology is the key to move up the value chain and for industrialization of developing economies, particularly in ASEAN. So, for this issue, we have our own journal called Asian Review of Political Economy, which is also included in Scopers. So if you are interested in this topic, your contributions would be greatly appreciated. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Dr. Luna Lai, thank you very much. Let me ask you just 1 minute follow-up question. And thank you very much for your very rich and multifaceted, multi-layered presentation. The slides, the data, all very rich and very deep. And we will also have the slides available for everyone to see subsequently. But I just want to ask you one quick question. Is ASEAN, based on your presentation, is ASEAN more dependent on China or is China more dependent on ASEAN? Yeah, and then, you talk about customs union. We're interested in this very much. Is it possible? Is it really plausible, viable? Just a very quick one.
Yeah. So thank you for your question. We don't mention customs union here because I think common external tariffs are not feasible in the short run, and so we just skip that part, not for the EU mode, but to see like for how China ASEAN can solve the market-oriented approach, because not even back in the Japanese mode, so it's more the technology spillover is a big concern, like how to maintain your technological um, advantages, but also let others to get opportunities to upgrade. So I think ASEAN is more and more needed from China's perspective, because now we do have our own version of technology, but I think we don't want to bifurcation of technology ecosystems. And I think ASEAN is the hub, manufacturing hub for both systems to integrate. And that's the most beneficial scenario I think ASEAN provides such an economic space to see how China's take and West American take can converge in some way and provide choices to third parties. That's my observation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Because we're interested in in this question. Traditionally ASEAN is the manufacturing powerhouse, the manufacturing hub. So you invest in ASEAN. ASEAN makes things from Japan, Japanese investment, US and Europe and so on. But moving forward, we'd be interested in if China can become an investor and also a consumer rather than a competitor for exports and for manufacturing. Let me move to Professor Pavita Paranont of Thammasat Business School. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Titinan, FES, and ISIS for having me today. Seems like the shift of focus is a bit contrast between the first panel and the second panel with no PowerPoint, and now we have a series of slides and everything. But with Dr. Titinan, who is not very keen on PowerPoint, I would try to keep my slides very short. And I think that I'm speaking from the context of ASEAN-China in the next decade. And what I would do is actually to invite you to see some of the pulse check of the economic activities that has been taking place over recent years and recent decades, that what it means for all the shift in geopolitics and geoeconomic concern. And I'm talking from kind of two main point. The first one, which is torn between two lovers. And to say this, I meant to say that ASEAN is caught between the choice, not really the choice, but the kind of the international system that Ambassador Godek mentioned before, that everyone benefits. And ASEAN was the manufacturing hub that benefit from that kind of prosperity of becoming the production hub, along with the rest of when China rise to become factory Asia, as Dr. Luna mentioned. But now that kind of efficiency-driven world is changing a little bit. So China and the US become the two superpower in terms of economics that ASEAN need to rely on, both the US as a market and also China as a potential market, but also a source of growth for ASEAN in terms of technology dependency and Chinese investment. So that's the first theme, and I call it torn between two lovers. And in this room, I hope that you know this song, but normally when I mention this song in my class, the students don't know the song, Torn Between Two Lovers, but at least we share some kind of common cultural reference in this room. And the second thing that I would like to point out is that ASEAN is not a single entity when it comes to economic interests. And I think that's the kind of the 2 points that I would like to point out before I invite you to see some of the slides that I prepared. This may be a little small, but the circle countries are countries in ASEAN. And this slide I took from a publication called Global Connectedness Index. It's done by DHL, a company that is a logistic company that measures the degree of global connectivity in terms of trade, investment, peoples, as well as information. But this slide was their latest update released in March in terms of global trade and what happened to global trade after 2025 was recognized as a year of reckoning and a year of rupture in the international economic system because of the reciprocal tariff rate that the US imposed on most countries. Surprisingly or unsurprisingly, I'm not sure, but global trade has become more resilient than previously thought. It hasn't really collapsed, and many countries in ASEAN that are dependent on trade to the external world has actually been doing well. Thailand, for example, is the second from the top. The best countries in terms of the growth of trade from ASEAN is Vietnam, unsurprisingly. And Thailand is there. Singapore is the third one, and Malaysia and Indonesia is the fourth one. So with this, we are kind of being reminded that despite the disruption resulted from the reciprocal tariff rate, most countries that are export dependent still does well at the end of 2025. Perhaps that results from many, the US included, front loading, trying to buy items as soon as they can before the impact of the shifting of manufacturing and trade kicks in further. But that's one of the pulse check for global trade. This one looks at whether the Trump shock or the reciprocal tariff rate has impact ASEAN that much in terms of trade. If you see on the left side, I took this slides from a report done by the Lowy Institute of Australia. And it looks at the ASEAN export to the US and what it meant for ASEAN export in comparison to Chinese export. As you can see, the figure 4 on the left-hand side shows China's declining export to the US. But at the same time, the countries that replace China export also falls under the ASEAN categories. Many people might think that this is a China plus one phenomenon, that countries in ASEAN benefit from relocation away from China or Chinese manufacturer and Chinese exporter being replaced by ASEAN one. But as you can see from the right-hand side, it's not just ASEAN, but also other countries that also benefit from this kind of shift that used to be dominated by China. You can see India, you can see Mexico becoming a key player in this kind of exporting into US. So I would not call it a China plus one phenomenon, but perhaps this is a China plus N, or some people call it China plus X. That means that trade and investment are becoming more regionalized and more different objectives, that trades and investment are being driven to different countries. If you look at ASEAN, you might think that because of ASEAN's proximity to China, ASEAN is replacing China as the kind of the exporter, as well as benefiting from the investment relocating away from China. But when you look at the rise of Mexico and India, you can see that trade is not just driven by firms or countries looking for another hub of export to the US and to the EU, but actually trade and investment is becoming more regionalized according to the need to diversify risk into different regional supply chain or regional value chain. So I would say that was 2025 really an evidence of a Trump shock following reciprocal tariff? Maybe not really, because actually trade hasn't really collapsed. the number of total trade in the world has actually increased in 2025, not decreased, which is contradicting to the year after COVID when trade really collapsed after COVID. So the next one, is it China shock then for ASEAN? What has China been to ASEAN? If you look at this, you will see that the increasing dominance of China in terms of the consumer product imports into ASEAN. This is something that when you look at the degree that it affects different countries in terms of from 2017, which is the dark blue graph on the left-hand side, that's the number of import that each ASEAN country import consumer products from China. As you can see, all countries except Singapore has increased its import from China in the consumer products. And if you look at the right-hand line graph, China has actually replaced the intra-ASEAN trade that has been kind of taking shape in the early 2010s, from 2010s to 2020s. Although ASEAN is not a region that would be like the EU in terms of intra-regional trade and investment. The EU intra-regional trade average around 50 to 60%, whereas for ASEAN, the number has not changed much from 15 to 20%. But as you can see that later on, China has become a major source of import for consumer into ASEAN. So that's one aspect of the increased Chinese economic dominance in ASEAN countries. And it's not just consumer products where you and I consume, but it is also dominating in intermediate products. If you look at this graph, the darker blue in the bottom of the graph signifies the amount of intermediate products. Intermediate products are the products that a lot of ASEAN countries sell: electrical appliance, car parts, and automotive parts. How intermediate products differ from final consumer product is that it's not just the trade that the buyer needs to make something with it, but it is also the trade that takes place a lot between the value chain of the same companies. Toyota might buy something from Thailand to assemble in its product in order for Toyota to sell the car from Thailand to Australia or to other countries. So the nature of this different nature of the intermediate and consumer means that it is not so easy for countries that depend a lot on the export of intermediate product to diversify their market. Because in order for Thailand to sell more intermediate product, Thailand needs to look at the countries that also have automotive companies that might be interested in buying the automotive parts from Thailand. So that's one thing that is the different nature of intermediate product versus consumer product. But if you look at that, you can see that China is also increasingly playing an important role in ASEAN. That means that ASEAN does not buy from China only in the consumer product, as the previous slide has shown. But also, ASEAN is buying a lot of intermediate product for the industries that ASEAN then produce at home to export. In other words, in simpler terms, perhaps Thailand might be wanting to sell this microphone, which is Bosch, German brand. But some part of that goes into this. Thailand might need to buy from China. And increasingly, that is being felt in Thailand and other ASEAN countries in order for them to sell their own products to the rest of the world. So that is an indirect influence that China is also exerting on the ASEAN countries. And if you look at not just trade, but investment, this is the trend that starts from 2005 all the way to 2024. I took this slide from a study also done by the Lowy Institute, but it looks at the role of the US and China in terms of investment. The yellow line represents South Korea, and the blue line is Japan, whereas the red line is China. And as most of the Kun Arun would be able to say this more, because Thailand has been a country that has received a lot of investment from Japan and from South Korea. In terms of the total foreign direct investment inward stock, Japan is still the highest. But if you look at the investment flow, which means the number of investment per year, China has exceeded Japan and Korea for investment in Thailand. So what this means is that for foreign direct investment, China has also now become the largest player in terms of the inward investor in ASEAN and in Asia. So we are looking at the three key factors that global value chain or global supply chain or global production network are connected. Intermediate products, final products, and investment. And this graph, the three last graph has shown that China has become the more important economic superpower in this part of the world. So is it China shock or is it Trump tariff shock to ASEAN? I think these are a question that we need to answer and to look closer into detail. And if you look at this graph, resilience for countries in different ASEAN countries is not the same when it links to China and the US. This graph shows which countries are more important to the US or more important to China. The horizontal line shows the importance to the US. So that means that countries that have more relationship with the US would be featured more on the right-hand side. But the vertical axis show the importance to China. So the higher it is, those countries are important to China. If you look at this graph, you can see that the ASEAN countries that actually are significant to both countries, they call it now not the BRICS that Dr. G mentioned, but it's VMI. It's the Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, and India. So it is these countries that are becoming the significant node in the global production and global investment because they matter both to the US and to China. From this graph, the country in ASEAN that matters most to the US is Malaysia. But in Indo-Pacific, the country that matters most to the US is India. Whereas for China, the country that matters a lot to them are Vietnam and Indonesia. So this graph shows that for resilience that we talk about, the country resilience is not the same. And we talk about ASEAN, but then different country in ASEAN means different things to these two superpowers in terms of economic power. So I think if you look at this graph, it gives you more details of those four countries, the VMI of the world, the Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, and India. And what sort of activities that are important to this country? The red is headquarters, the blue is R&D center, the yellow is production, the brown is logistic, and the green is support service. If you look at this graph, the country that most ASEAN country matters from the sense of production. But when you look at countries like Malaysia, this is the country that is more resilient because it provides a lot of options for companies that are coming into ASEAN. Malaysia provides not just the production hub, but Malaysia also plays an increasing role as a headquarter and also R&D center. So with all this, what does it mean? I think that these are my last slide. When you look at the disruption that has taken place, you look at Southeast Asia future in global value chain, And we have to accept that the world that was driven commonly and largely by efficiency concern is now being driven more by security-driven interests. And that's where the terms geoeconomics come in. Actually, when I look at the definition of geoeconomic, it was written from 1990 by Professor Ludwig, that geoeconomics is the logic of war in the grammar of commerce. So even the commerce and economic interests become zero-sum rather than positive-sum, as we would have liked to think. So what is the implication on that? Implication for that is that we talked in the previous panel about the country concern and the security concern for the country. But when we look at the geoeconomic relationship between countries, it's not just driven by national concern, but it is also driven by industry concern and also the company concern that drive the activities of economic activities. So we are having more multi-layered complexity in the geoeconomic field because the players are not just determined by one country and one concern for national security. National security can be driven by different ways of doing things. If you look at the strategy of the US is using the strategy to create a high gate so that people have to pay a high price in entering the US market, paying reciprocal tariff rate, paying either Section 301 or something. But it is the high price countries pay to get access to the US market. China is playing a different strategy. China is creating choke points in the key strategic industry concern. Rare earth mineral is a key example. And if you look at Dr. Luna's graph, you can see that China is also becoming a partner into the growth of ASEAN countries as well. So that is a concern that I think we have to think about. And I think the second and the third point, I would go through it very quickly because that's perhaps more business concern, that the idea of the finding an export hub in one place, like Factory Asia, that China played a key role, is no longer the kind of strategy that would be important. Because countries start to see that when you look at one hub for doing something, it creates vulnerability and creates risk for being dependent on that one hub. So that's why, although ASEAN may not share a lot of the interest in terms of the countries, because everybody is trying to go after the foreign direct investment and go after the export market that is out there. But at least there's one common the least common denominator for ASEAN countries in terms of going forward, I think, is the potential of the ASEAN market that can be perhaps built further. And I think I would like to just finish with some implication that I didn't write down, but I think I have mentioned a lot, that complexity of security driven is not just national security, but concern on geoeconomic security is much more complex. And I think that forces every country to think about what they are doing in terms of their industrial policy, because countries are not doing the same thing. And I think that's the challenge for China and ASEAN, because it's not just one agenda for ASEAN, and it's different agenda for different countries. So it is best to think of that diversity, complexity, but also what is the common interest for ASEAN country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. PowerPoint slides also will be shared. VMI, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, India doesn't include Thailand. So it's something for us to think about in Thailand. And then the point about, 2025 was a big tariff year, big announcement, liberation. But in fact, the U.S. trade deficit with Thailand and Vietnam went up. So we actually sold more. And the deficit with China went down, which means that it's working, but it also means that they will be looking very carefully at the transshipments. I think there'll be a lot of suspicions in Washington that it's because of transshipment from China. That's why exports from ASEAN have gone up. Kun Narun ครับ Narun M. Suri, he is the chairman of the Thai Chinese Economic and Investment Institute, TCEII, and also the vice chairman of the Federation of Thai Industries. He also has companies on boards of different companies, and he's been around Thai different industries for a long time. So he can share with us maybe a little bit of on-the-ground practical experience that you've seen on these dynamics, ASEAN-China, Thailand-China. Kun Narunครับ
His Excellency Godek, Professor Titinan, and distinguished panelists and distinguished guests. I actually not expecting this senior audience. So basically, what I have prepared, maybe I change quite a lot for today's presentation. Basically, I'm representing the Federation of Thai Industry. Just in short, it is one of the three standing committee of Federation of Thai Industry, Commerce, Chamber of Commerce, and the Banking Association. So the three joining to do a strategic bridge from the private sector to the government. So we have been doing this role for decades. And a lot of fundamental, a lot of regulation. Actually, we have all the roadmap, supposed to have all the roadmap, but unfortunately, we are not able to achieve what we are established for, because for the past 10 years, our GDP average is about 1.9, very low. Compared to the fundamental that we have, we are very strategic in terms of the locations and fundamental. We have quite a strong comparing to our neighbor like Vietnam and other countries. So basically, what I'm going to pass on to you today maybe will be more on the private sector, the pain point on China and ASEAN and Thai. So what we are and where we are. So what will be the next? The few slides, just to give the introduction. I think this is just a common background. The GDP number one is US. China and Thailand is around number 30. So we are about 2% to US. And ASEAN itself, it is about 12% to US. So other country, any country in the world, comparing to these two powerhouses, are quite small. So basically, during the past years, in terms of the bargaining powers of all the country to US or even to China are quite minimal. The figures that we see, even ASEAN that we are talking about the topic of the China ASEAN, I also feel personally that we are not doing a good job in terms of unify. When President Trump announced the reciprocal tariff, and everybody fly in to White House to negotiate. I think the first or the second guest to White House is Secretary To Lam from Vietnam, because their economy rely heavily on US. They have a big surplus. The top surplus of ASEAN country to US is Vietnam. After this trade war, the game that we see in the ASEAN, there are three countries that has a winning status. We have Vietnam in terms of the deficit to China, to the surplus that they gain from US. Everybody has a surplus on US. Everybody has a deficit to China. But Thailand is the one who, when we settle to part, we have a negative of about 20 billion US dollar. So basically, there are some countries that win on this trade war game, but Thailand is not the winner. So basically, I give you some idea. This is from the online information. We are talking about the GDP, that we are talking about the powerhouse on the military powers. So these two powerhouse, no doubt, now number one and number two, no other countries can match. So this is a significant in terms of the nuclear warhead, in terms of the budget, in terms of the tank, submarine. So this is just to show between number one and number two. I have read one of the article that if there is nothing done, China GDP will be number one by 2030. This is some years back that I have read the article. That is why dominant power like the US has to take action on the trade war. But for Chinese, a lot of them, they say, okay, they're already number one in terms of the GDP by purchasing parity since 2018. So number one and number two, I think it is going to be who will be number one, number two, but they are both two powerhouse. This information is actually what happened about the conflict, and then in Korea, October last year, they already have 1 year pending. But we see that will be the next round for sure. When, I don't know, because when they are ready, there will be another next round on the trade war. This slide like to show a little bit what happened. The trade war this round start in Trump's first term, 2018. That period, the biggest importer is Europe, then US, and then ASEAN. So when US launched the trade tariff with China, then basically things changed. By 2023, ASEAN become number one importer from China. And unfortunately, Thailand is one of among the most importer and most deficit to Chinese. This slide shows the products that we export and import. So mostly our product that we export to China will be agricultural and low value base of the product, whereas China export to Thailand will be high tech. So basically that is the deficit that we have from Chinese. Sorry, this is in Thai, just to show that during the last 10 years, the import volume increased by 82%, but in terms of the deficit, it is now 382. So basically, in terms of volume higher and also deficit is higher, much higher. So this is something is in balance. And in long term, I think in the ASEAN also has a similar view that maybe it is not a win-win game, right? Maybe there's only one win and the other is a loser. So my personal observation, China also not prepared, because since 2018, I talked to a lot of Chinese friends. They also have to survive. So there's a flood out of the foreign direct investment, merchandise, products, people also coming out a lot. You can see Now, there's a joke that in Hue Kwang, Rachada, they call it Monton, right? It's like one of the Chinese town. You see all the investment there. A lot of gray business and a lot of not legally conduct. And also a lot of Chinese here are not on a proper tracking. For example, you can see a lot of them are on the student visa and are working. So this is a distort of the system that for the local we also have concern. So I have the do and don't when talk about for Federation of Thai Industry, our roles, we welcome Chinese to come to Thailand and ASEAN. And you have to understand that even in ASEAN we are competing, so they are not unified. Our BOI, when try to convince the foreign direct investment to come in, so we have to match to Vietnam and to Indonesia. So whatever they give the incentive, we must top up or we have to provide them better solution. So a lot of incentive or scheme also now being distorted. Like Professor Parida said, now over 50% of foreign direct investment is from China. They come maybe not directly from China, maybe some from Hong Kong and Singapore. So this is a funding from China. They will get the exemption of income tax 8 years. They get the exempt on the import duty for so-called negative list. Negative list is something that Thailand cannot manufacture or produce. And they also, when they get the exempt on the import duty, they also automatic exemption from VAT. So for the next 8 years, if Thai cannot get into the supply chain of Chinese investment in Thailand, basically we get nothing. No income tax, no import duty, and no VAT. So in terms of the government revenue, we also will be in trouble. This is what we see. Basically, there are actually rules and regulations, but the system that we have, some are not in proper place. There are some in distort. For example, like a negative list. The factory today, now under the construction, Chinese factory under the construction, actually they bring everything in, except cements. The rest they import. Actually, it is not legal. Okay, we have a compulsory on the products. For example, like a metal sheet, the cable, power cables, all this has to be certified, but they come in the containers and nobody checks. So this is also something in Thailand and some in other our neighbor country as well. So this is something that we think during the past years, Thai has not been prepared. So I say it is not about China shock or Trump shock. I think this is also ASEAN shock. We are not prepared. Nobody has been prepared for such a change. And now we know what happened. Then we need to make the system into the proper place, the policy into the proper place. The regulator must do a proper job. So all this we also have a roadmap, and then we submit to the new government already. The biggest concern for me as a private sector is we have the problem on the corruption. I have to admit that the system is in balance, and then we cannot anymore can stand with that behaviors. So this is something that we try to push forward our policy on that.
คุณอรุณครับ thank you very much. I think I want to highlight this point and also to maybe highlight to our Chinese colleagues, about the quality of the Chinese investment. If you mentioned they bring in everything except cement, so Thailand not getting much out of it. Another figure that stood out for me, the value of trade went up, bilateral China-Thailand trade, 82%, right? 82%. But the deficit between Thailand and China went up 382%. So we have a big deficit with China, and China not investing in high quality industries. So this is something that for our Chinese colleagues, I think to maybe take notice. There's some concern about Chinese, the quality of Chinese investment in Thailand.
May I add a little bit? Presently, the manufacturing index that we have information is overall the country is less than 60% of all products. Meaning the factory is meant to manufacture at maximum at 100. We are now producing less than 60. And some industry like a metal is only 28%. So the figures that we are still maintain a strong trade. Actually, it is not a locally made product. So-called the U.S. monitor this and call a transshipment. The product come in and go out. This is one of the reasons that we have been closely watched by U.S. government and under a lot of pressure, our team Thailand, we have a team Thailand government to negotiate on the reciprocal tariff of 3-4 rounds. So this is one of the issues about the transshipment. We are not able to protect our back door good enough. So now we know system should be better placed now.
Thank you very much, ครับ คุณอรุณ Our next speaker is คุณเลี้ยวฮอนพัฒโนไทย He's the Executive Director of Just Transitions Incubator, Duty, and the founder and convener of the Bangkok Climate Action Week. So if you know, Bangkok Climate Action Week is all over town for the whole week. So he's a founder of that, and then also he's used to be with the World Resources Institute. The renewables, green transition, this kind of, the climate and sustainability, China has kind of led the way in a way, right? So is this an area where we can rely more on China in ASEAN, the future of China-ASEAN, renewables, green transition?
Thank you, Ajahn. And to borrow from Ajahn Pavida, I find myself not torn, but caught between two lovers. And perhaps because I'm not married to Ajahn Jay, I actually took his advice not to prepare a PowerPoint. So I spare you those. But I look forward to reviewing in more detail your PowerPoint slides. I want to come back to your question just now to the first panelist. Does China gain more or does ASEAN gain more from this relationship? And I want to start by suggesting that actually the more important question is they both have an equal stake, right? The more important framing is that both have an equal stake in making this relationship durable and stable and mutually advantageous. So the question really is how to make that happen. And I believe the exam question for this panel, which I'm going to be addressing, what is the opportunity and challenge for in ASEAN-China geoeconomic relations? I'm coming at that from the perspective of what will it take to deliver shared development and environmental goals. And let's remember that the SDGs, this is encoded currently in the Sustainable Development Goals, right? Achieving the SDGs requires deepening international cooperation and a rules-based international order. That's why we have SDG 17 on partnership as the key that unlocks all the other SDGs. That said, that order, the international rules-based order, as we've heard a lot this morning already, as we've known it, no longer exists, right? What comes next has yet to be defined. And in the context of the US withdrawal from international sustainable development cooperation, 66 institutions have had their, international institutions have had their funding from the US withdrawn. US withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord. At the same time, ODA, the Overseas Development Assistance, on which the developing countries over-relied for meeting their own development goals, is now unraveling. The EU is stuck in its own funk and in gridlock, right? And other major emerging economies, Brazil, India, have limited capacity or interest to really step into that leadership void. So against that backdrop, global progress hinges to an unusual degree on what happens in Beijing. In fact, I would say that what happens in Beijing is going to shape the order, what comes next. And this is a very unusual and uncomfortable position for China to be in, right? China, as long as the PRC has existed, has always been a taker of the international rules-based order. And now it finds itself in a situation where whatever it does is going to shape the international order in one way or another. So kind of thrust into a position of having to take responsibility globally for what it decides to do. That doesn't mean, though, that the middle powers, as we heard, that this region, that we're mere sitting ducks, right? That we have to adopt a passive stance. In fact, ASEAN can and must help shape what comes next. And there's an opportunity, and I would say an imperative, for robust recalibration of the China-ASEAN relationship, the cooperation, especially in the fields of environment and development, in a way that shapes this broader context and highlights a positive path forward for China that would be to the benefit, I think, of the rest of the world too. And not only is this necessary, I'd say, for global progress, it's in China's self-interest, and it is, of course, in ASEAN's interest too. So let me start with the domestic picture in China. China bet the house on the world transitioning to clean technology. 15 years of consistent, intense investment in what the Chinese call the Xinshanyang, the EVs, electrification, renewable energy, which now is a major driver of the Chinese economy. 10% of China's GDP is in these new economic sectors. And by the way, this was, I would say, a very reasonable premise 15 years ago, right? To make the bet that the world will move from petrol kind of dependency to becoming basically an electro-economy, global electro-economy. China is the first country, I would say, to have made that transition into being an electro-economy. And we're seeing already China in its relationship with other countries. Pakistan comes to mind as a recent one. 2 years ago, Pakistan imported a third of its power capacity in solar power from China. And this was a bottom-up. It wasn't big deals behind closed doors. It was a bottom-up picture that unraveled. And we can talk a lot more about Pakistan, but that's just an example of the sheer momentum behind this transition to the electro economy that is happening in most countries. If you're not still caught in the petro state alliance, a lot of countries and this region, there's a lot of dynamism, a lot of momentum in that direction, right? The second point about China's interest, how this aligns with China's interest, is that China, it aligns with China's evolving role, let's say, as a global sustainable development contributor, right? So China has evolved towards more assertiveness, more leadership. Is a funny word that the Chinese are uncomfortable about, but it has played leadership roles in international treaties such as the Montreal Protocol. The Chinese played a very important role shaping new international norms and agreements in that arena of biodiversity. The China-US agreement, the handshake between President Obama and his Chinese counterpart in 2014 was a precursor for the Paris Agreement even being able to happen, right? So China has evolved its role and investing a lot more in international institutions' capacities, and also not just as a pace setter or investor, but also as a norm setter in areas I mentioned, biodiversity just now. Finance is another one. Thailand has got a green taxonomy. A growing number of countries have got green taxonomies, including ASEAN as a whole. This is something that China, the People's Bank of China, developed back in 2015. A lot of the norms around green finance that are now being internationalized through the International Institute for Standards actually are building on Chinese leadership. That said, China is ambivalent about leadership, and I would say understandably, right? Why should China fill a US-shaped gap in the world? It's not a very, I don't think it's a reasonable thing that one should expect China to even want to do. That said, in Chinese, the word for leadership is 领导, and they don't like to use that word. What they like to use instead is the word 引领者, which is kind of torchbearer or kind of trailblazer. And I think that's a much better word for how China sees itself, not hegemonically, but how China sees itself as an international actor, not dictating to other countries, but really showing showing the path forward. And so I think maybe that's, it's terminology, but there's a lot of sensitivity around there, around the use of the word leadership, and I think it comes from a rejection of a model of leadership that China wants to differentiate in its own path. So from ASEAN's perspective, certainly in ASEAN's interest to grow this relationship, mature this relationship in a way that works for the long term, right? I think we've been very transactional and short term, ASEAN as a whole, in the way we've approached the partnership with China. It has evolved. China has become a major external partner to the region in its sustainability climate arena. But it has the potential and it has the necessity, I would say, to show up in a much more robust way for the region. Put simply, there is no way that this region can advance its green transition and meet its climate goals without partnership with China. How to make that relationship work for that goal is going to be absolutely key, right? And I would say that China has the potential to be ASEAN's most important external partner in meeting these goals. And that said, struggling still with implementation gaps, with a lot of mixed outcomes. We've heard about the mixed track record, a lot of iffy projects, that linked to Chinese past investments, present investments, one might add. Issues of pollution offshoring, environmental dumping, where standards are higher for China internally than in the products that they export. So these are all very important issues that are key to address, because that is a basis of trust, that is a basis of building a collaborative relationship that can have legitimacy and stand the road, because this is a long-term journey that we need to kind of contextualize this partnership within. And there's a lot to be gained in coming together in that journey. Just harmonizing standards, making sure that our standards for the new green economy align, has a potential to unlock $300 billion worth of the green economy in terms of clean energy, green manufacturing, digitalization, smart supply chains, etc. So there's a lot to be gained. Challenges, I started touching on some of them. There's also on the Chinese side, the fact that China, finance is in a weak point. China has now shifted to wanting to fund small and beautiful because they have a cash crunch at home, and of course there's also the issue of debt. Half of Laos' debt is to China. It's a third of its GDP. The size of the Laotian China-Laotian railway represents a third of the Laos GDP. So a very unsustainable situation, and we see similarly in Myanmar and in Cambodia. So a lot of concern in terms of, as we grow this relationship, how do we make sure that we do not drive countries into unsustainable debt situations? And the last point I would say, and this is really back on ASEAN, right? Like, there has been a very weak signal, demand signal for Chinese investments in the green sector. And we have ourselves to blame for this, right? We have ourselves to blame in Thailand for the fact that we don't have an energy transition roadmap that has a clear investment portfolio aligned to it, which we can then go to. It doesn't have to just be a China, right? We can go to any country in the world that wants to trade with us, that we have a plan of what we want investment in. That's on us, and that's on ASEAN. And I believe that with that strong demand signal, we'll have a much better negotiating and power, getting a favorable outcome, mutually advantageous outcome with China. So to realize this vision of a few points about realizing this vision of a reinvigorated China-ASEAN green transition partnership is how I would like to think about it. Firstly, I would say it's broadening the channels of diplomacy, right? Diplomacy doesn't have to just be government to government. Thinking about diplomacy in much broader terms, harking back to the spirit of solidarity that was expressed in Bandung in 1955. Looking at how, and by the way, we have very good examples of this already happening, right? In this campus, we have the Chinese Academy of Sciences established a regional cooperation center. I don't know if Richard is in the room. Led by Richard Liu. They're doing a lot of projects regionally to build scientific technology innovation collaboration. So that's one example. People to people, CSOs developing links, kind of track 2, track 3 diplomacy is, I think, one way to build that stronger kind of super highway of cooperation that can withstand geopolitical tumult. Secondly is what I mentioned earlier, harmonizing standards for the new green economy, for the electric economy. Thirdly, really importantly, policy consistency, right? Not, with one hand giving out green handout, making green investments, while with others building captive coal power in nickel mines that are destroying local environments and communities. So policy consistency, and the bigger picture of policy consistency is really hardwiring the green transition partnership into the economic agenda, explicitly aligning, for example, the strategic frameworks, whether it's a global development initiative from China and ASEAN community vision, operationalizing a green prosperity agenda through co-investment in renewable, in energy, in green infrastructure. And the most important thing is, I think, a mindset shift from the Chinese side to pivoting towards a positive sum vision for economic cooperation in the era. China will not fulfill this vision if it continues to think in terms of global market share or export, like China makes, the world takes. It's reaching its political and its geoeconomic limits. So to borrow from Robert Keohane, a famous international relations scholar, in his book, Landmarks, a book called After Hegemony, for power to endure, the hegemonic power needs to learn to accept limits to its own power and pivot to a more explicitly mutually advantageous economic cooperation framework. Similar to what the Japanese did with the flying geese, right? There was a lot of investment, technology transfer, scientific collaboration, and there's a lot already that China has to play with to move in that direction. But this is all of this is premise on China consciously embracing a long-term vision of its green development at the center of a growing global green economic system of mutual advantage, in which China's success is tied to building resilient, sustainable value chains, new rules and standards for the global green economy, and robust green transition partnerships. encompassing trade, science, technology, cooperation, and creating win-win propositions for partner countries. So that's a big if, right? But I believe it's in China's interest, I believe it's in the ASEAN's interest, and I believe it's for the better of the planet and meeting our global shared goals for protecting the global commons.
Thank you very much, Leo. We're just going to take a few more minutes. I know we're a little bit over time. Just for any comment or question from the floor, I just posed this initially, just a 5-minute round. Are we seeing, Leo, an emergence of separate systems? So if China clean and green transition, renewables, and the U.S. is the baby drill, going back to fossil fuels. And is this a trend? And then second, related to that is if you go green and the others don't go green with you, it's a dilemma. Going green doesn't work if you don't all go green. So it's something that I don't know how what they're thinking, and I know you have a very good feel. You know China very well inside China from outside. So that's something I'm thinking about. And remember, you can think about: are we seeing emergence of two systems on energy? And then maybe are we being asked, opposed to choose? Any other question to comment from the floor in this session? If not, I'll just be very quick. Yeah, just very quick. I'm just going to give an opportunity to Dr. Luna Lai to say just a 1-minute final remarks, and then Professor Pavita and Kun Arun, and then Kun Leo.
So I think I have 2 points. The first point is I think Chinese intermediate input, if everyone is using that as a production advantage, because it's so cost competitive, if you don't use it, then that's a loss in developing your production advantages. So to strengthen that, I think rules of origin is a big concern, like not only for Thailand but for all ASEAN countries. So I think actually it's also in the long run, I think it's beneficial for Chinese companies to multinationalize their manufacturing, because if you, as just mentioned, so there's a limit in global market share, so you have to localize your manufacturing capabilities and cooperate with local stakeholders. And I think the external pressure from the U.S. is a great incentive to further strengthen this supply chain cooperation, not only for assembly, but also upgrade to technology transfer and local ecosystem building. That's first point. And the second point regarding to the dumping or the second wave of China shock, I think it all happens in a very compressed time period. So a lot of manufacturing companies in Guangdong, they are not that well prepared to internationalize their business. So I understand, for even for the cross-border movement of people, there are some workers using the visa-free policy to do job here. I think that's because that all happens in a very short time manner. So I think it takes time for companies to adhere to local requirements, and I think Guangdong manufacturing companies, they already notice the complaints, and they are making, I think, positive changes to that.
Okay, very good to know. So they are aware about the dumping, and maybe it takes time for them to adjust Chinese dumping. Okay.
And also the shock to the SMEs in the local manufacturing system. I think these kind of complaints are well received in the China end, but I think it still takes time because, even
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Luna. Professor Pavita, final remarks, 1 minute.
1 minute. I think we started with the role that the middle power can do in coping with the superpower. And I think it's probably too much to ask the superpower to think of how they can become benevolent superpower with the winner takes all mentality. So I guess the onus is on the middle power to also do their homework in terms of being prepared, knowing where their resilience lie, and in terms of geoeconomics, is knowing what you can do to become indispensable is a key homework that I think we have to crack that, because it's not a shared answer to everyone.
Thank you คุณอรุณครับ
ครับ we all know world is not the same, and ASEAN will play a strategic importance. Even the GDP is not big, but it is a good, very good logistic and hub. So for Thai, we think we need to adapt a lot. We need to reinvent a lot of things, because we used to be in the low tech and labor intensive. OEM need to upgrade to ODM and OBM. In terms of competition among the ASEAN country, this is also the challenges, because we produce similar products, similar service. So this is something, this is a challenge to further discussion on. Like I say, Thai is about 3% to China and about 2% to US. So actually there's a big opportunity to grow if we are able to be in the supply chain of the superpower. So basically we need to work a lot to be in the supply chain. I think for the past years, most of the people are not alerted. Now I think everybody know they have to be riding this train, otherwise they will be gone.
Thank you ขอบคุณครับ
Thank you, Ajahn Thitinan. I think it's a false choice between the petrol economy and the clean economy. One is the technology of the past, the other is the technology of the future, right? And the reason for the last several years, at least 3 years, investments in renewables far outpaced investment in fossil fuels, is a reflection of that. And this region is investing, like many other places, investing in clean energy because it's cheaper. The kilowatt hour from renewable sources is actually cheaper than from fossil sources. It's more reliable. We're reminded of that now with the Iran situation, right? That of the security benefits of not having to rely on something that has to go through a very narrow strait in a very conflict-ridden zone. So it's a superior technology. Now, I'm sure, actually, I don't know this as a fact, but I would wager that back in the early part of the 20th century, that when cars were being introduced, I'm sure that the horse stable owners mounted a fierce lobby and resistance. But when there's superior technology, I think the U.S. will come around at some point. In fact, the U.S. is already. If you look at the reality of what's happening, the state that is leading investments in renewable energy in America is also one of the reddest states, as in one of the states that is most hostile policy-wise towards renewables, Texas, right? Much more than California. And a lot of the red states, actually, in the MAGA coalition, are actually now pushing back on the Trump administration's attempts to kneecap solar industry. So this is just superior technology. That ship has sailed. It's I think the only sensible choice and it's a choice that countries in the region are taking, right, is to invest in the future, which is an electro-economy. There was another point that I was going to make. Oh yes, yeah, I think this region has a very proud tradition of strategic hedging. So none of what I was suggesting is to say that we should make a choice between China or America. I think we should lean into that very proud tradition in this region of doing that. the onus, as Ajahn Pavita rightly said, is on us to be clear about what we want, right? And then stand by that, stand on that, and stand by that when we enter economic relations and negotiate terms of economic relations with whatever power it be, whether it's China or the U.S. or any other power. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's not binary. So even in the U.S., there will only be more Teslas, not less. Look, I want to thank everyone very much today. We have this good, productive morning and constructive on ASEAN, China in the next decade, Western Hemisphere, Europe, Indo-Pacific, and Middle East. We haven't stopped any war, and we haven't really solved the global problems, but I think that we are still insistent on this premise that China and ASEAN have to find ways to work together more and more, just because the world is increasingly adverse, and we will do that in the future symposia and forums. But please join me in thanking all of the speakers, Dr. Luna Lai, Professor Pavita Pananon, Kun Arun Yem Suri, and Kun Leo Horn Patano Thai. Thank you very much.